Okay, I hope you can hear me. Let's get starting. Welcome to this Cloud8 session all about multi-tenant. My name is Rolf Tröndle. I work as a Microsoft Cloud consultant for a company like IC Tröndle and Change Cockpit. I'm an MVP in Microsoft Teams and also former Microsoft Certified Solutions Master for those of you who still remember these times. Before we go and start, a shout out to our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors who makes this Cloud8 event possible. This is first of all .cloud company, then ScriptRunner, and also Change Cockpit. Then this session, as just mentioned, is about multi-tenant. The agenda is, first of all, we go through a quick scope and definition about what we are covering, what we don't, what the tenant is, and so on. Then scenarios for multi-tenant organization, building blocks to create a multi-tenant organization, then MTO features in more detail, the requirements, then we go through a demonstration, how to configure multi-tenant organization in Microsoft 365. And last but not least, some Q&A at the end, or perhaps you already post in some stuff between or during the presentation. Okay, then the scope this presentation is about. It's about multi-tenant organization with Teams, SharePoint Online, and OneDrive for Business. I specify this so clearly because there are other multi-tenant features available in Microsoft 365 and or Entra ID, like multi-tenant applications for developers, multi-tenant in Azure, and there's also multi-tenant organization / or multi-tenant management in the Defender and Security portal, which can be used in conjunction. If we would have time left, we could go through this, but it's not the idea is not to cover this during this session now. First of all, so we are all on the same page, the definition of a tenant. So a tenant in Microsoft 365 is basically a digital playground that Microsoft rents to you as a customer. So you think you are the boss, but in reality, you are just a janitor taking care of users, licenses, and updates. And the tenant is also your personal IT sandbox toy that sometimes feels like Microsoft built the sandcastle, but you have to stop the storm, especially regarding all the changes rolling in every month. Then the tenant, another definition, a third one, the place where users believe everything just works. More specifically, your users. And while in the background, you're desperately juggling PowerShell commands, trying not to trigger a disaster. So these are some, I hope, some funny definitions. But now let's go through more technical definition of a tenant. First of all, it's your tenant address, right? It's you have something in Entra ID or Microsoft 365 Live tenant.onmicrosoft.com. This covers the identity and access management. You have your own Entra ID partition, your Entra ID tenant. This controls the authentication and permissions for your users who are accessing your Microsoft 365 apps, such as Word, also Word Online, Excel, Teams, SharePoint, and so on. Everything within a tenant, and that's the base idea of a tenant, it's isolated. It's your personal or your company's secure boundary, if you have one or more tenants boundaries, isolating your data, your users and applications from the rest of the world, all the other tenants, all the other companies who are using Microsoft 365. And you can have your own custom configurations. Yes, Microsoft rolls out a lot of default configuration stuff, and you can also have your custom configuration items in your tenant, which differs from other tenants or may differ from other tenants. But the most important thing is to distinguish it between the tenant names. And then this is not by the definition of a tenant, but it's for multi-tenant organization, it's a very, very important topic. It's the guest users. If you have one tenant, you can allow another tenant's users access to your tenant with B2B collaboration and having a guest user invitation to your tenant. For example, when you invite someone external into your team, then you invite or you create create a guest user in your tenant for as a placeholder for the user in the other tenant in the for the invited users. This extends access to these individuals, but you still maintain the control over the resources. But because it's only a placeholder, this guest user only is a placeholder. You don't maintain a password like you would do if you create a regular user. That's I also know it's B2B Direct Connect available, and we go through this just in some minutes. But why should we use multi-tenant organization in Microsoft 365? We have multi-tenant scenarios. First of all, a conglomerate. So let's say your company has multiple subsidiaries or business units which operate independently. They all need their own configuration. There are certain, as just mentioned before, you have tenant-wide configurations, but some configuration items are tenant specific and not user or group specific, meaning you can turn it either on or off. And if you have subsidiaries who, for example, needs to have guest access in Teams, or you need to invite other people into your Teams, then this is an on and off switch basically, and things like this. So you have perhaps independent and different requirements regarding policies in your organizations, and you could have multiple tenants. Mergers and acquisitions, I think that's the most typical we see out in the field. I also see out in the field in this, it's an organization which buys or acquires and merges with another company. Often we go then through tenant-to-tenant migration and do all this migration stuff, often with third-party tools. Microsoft has more and more tools by themselves to migrate data between tenants. But instead of having, perhaps after this session, the conclusion is, yeah, a multi-tenant organization is sufficient for your needs, for your requirements when you buy a company. Often when there is a merger out there, I see that the most important thing is to have shared or to have access to each other's calendar. And you can have this basically also with multi-tenant organizations scenarios. Then multiple geographical boundaries. If you have operations in multiple boundaries or in multiple geos with various residency regulations. Yes, I know there is also multi-geo licensing available. If that's sufficient, then you can go with one tenant. But as an example, Exchange Online Protection processes data in the specific tenant, where the tenant is located. So let's say my tenant is in Europe, located in Europe, then all Exchange Online Protection mails will be scanned and processed inside the European region. This could be not enough for an Australian company. I had this case. The Australian company required specifically to have 100% of the processing of the data done within the Australia country and not within the European country. So there could be a necessity to have multi-tenant organizations because they need their dedicated tenant in Australia. Then could be test or staging tenants if you have multiple tenants and still want to work together. What are then the building blocks for such a multi-tenant organization? The first three building blocks are, as a common known. We already know these technologies for a long time now. The first one is cross-tenant access settings, B2B collaboration users. We will go in more depth in the following minutes. Then we have the cross-tenant synchronization. And once we have these three building blocks in place, that's the foundation for this. Then on top of this, we will build a multi-tenant organization configuration, and this then allows the fifth building block that's called multi-tenant people search. Actually, it's kind of strange because it's a building block according to Microsoft, but it's multi-tenant people search is a feature which you will get out of the multi-tenant organization configuration. Then the first one here, we have the cross-tenant access settings. These were known as soon as Teams shared channel were released. To use shared channel between tenants or between external users, you need to have B2B, these cross-tenant access settings configured for B2B Direct Connect. Direct Connect is not the same as B2B collaboration. we'll see this on the next slide. So basically, for those of you who still remember the good old times when we merged we have a merger and acquisition, and we only had on-premises infrastructure, then the first thing we often done is we created external or forest trusts between Active Directory forests. So let's say this cross-tenant access settings is some kind, it's not the same, but it's some kind of a trust, a link, a configuration link between tenants, so they know each other and they trust each other, and it's also a foundation for B2B Direct Connect. But we need this also for multi-tenant organizations, and it manages how you allow or disallow access. So you need first, every tenant has two pieces of the configuration. You have outbound access settings and you have inbound access settings. So let's say on your tenant you have outbound access settings and you say you trust the resource enter tenant. Then you would configure the outbound access settings for allow or block internal users groups, external apps, or only for certain for some specific users. Same on the resource tenant. In this graphic here, we see the allow or block for also for the external users, internal apps. So these pieces must match together so the trust or the cross-tenant access settings really work. You can also decide to trust the MFA claims. So if a user already did MFA in their home tenant, and then you can also trust this MFA claim if you have conditional access configured for your resources, so they don't have to do another MFA in your tenant for their guest user, as an example. Same for the device claims for compliant devices, device compliance like Intune enrolled devices, and hybrid join devices for enter hybrid join. That's the first part, or the first building block. Then we have the B2B collaboration part. We don't use B2B Direct Connect for multi-tenant organization. I listed it here just to have the full picture of the technologies. B2B Direct Connect is basically a cross-tenant access settings trust, but with B2B Direct Connect, the external users are not represented in your tenant. So the user in this tenant, let's say in this purple tenant, these users in this purple tenant may access your primary tenant, the blue one, but they are not represented as a guest object in your tenant. So that's with B2B Direct Connect. But to use it for multi-tenant organization, we need to B2B collaboration users. So as mentioned before, if you did this probably for years now. When you invited an external user into a Teams as a guest user, then this user was created as a guest user in your Enter ID, and the external user got an invitation to join your tenant. And this user will then be shown in the primary tenant in the blue one, and it represents the purple tenant and also has in the user principal name the tenant name of the purple tenant built in. We will see this later for multi-tenant organization. But for the normal guest user access scenario, we use a B2B guest user. Now for multi-tenant organization, we will go one step further, and this B2B guest user will be a B2B member users. More on that later. So it's more included, or it's more a real user in your tenant. The third building block is the cross-tenant synchronization. The synchronization, it's part of the cross-tenant access settings configuration. If you do it manually, then you will be able to synchronize users from the respective tenants, or you will be able to synchronize users between tenants. So all users, or only users in scope from the source tenant, the purple one, can be automatically synchronized using cross-tenant synchronization engine. That's a feature that's part of Enter ID to your, let's say it's your tenant, the target tenant in the blue one. Same for the green one. So you will see automatically if there will be a user, a joiner or a leaver, then all these users for a new user in here, and the purple one will be automatically synchronized as B2B guest or B2B member into your target tenant, and then you will be able to grant them access to Teams, and they won't get any invitation anymore because they were already synchronized to users and are already available in there. So that's the synchronization part. We need this to have a unified global address list as an example. If you would like to have this, you can configure this during multi-tenant configuration. Then, as mentioned before, there is a multi-tenant people search available. So as soon as you have your multi-tenant synchronization or your B2B, the cross-tenant synchronization available, then you can also have multi-tenant people search. And if you elevate these user types, as mentioned, we don't use B2B guests, or we can use, but normally we don't use in multi-tenant org B2B guests. We elevate these users to type member. You can do this on every guest user in your tenant. Also now already, you go into the details, into the properties of this user and change it from guest to member. And as soon as it's a member users, then you will have this user available in multi-tenant people search. If you configure also show in address list to true for global address list in Exchange Online, and as mentioned, you need user type equals member for collaboration in other Microsoft 365 apps. Don't worry, you don't have to do this for all guest users manually. When you set up multi-tenant organization, this can be done using mapping automatically from the synchronization engine. Then we have the multi-tenant organization configuration itself. We had the basic building blocks, and now on top of this, we will configure now the multi-tenant organization, and this sets the boundary around the tenants. So we always have an owner tenant, one owner tenant, and we have one or more member tenants. We will configure this later for one owner and one member tenant, and then you define the boundary of your multi-tenant MTO organization with all the joining tenants. It's basically an invite and accept flow, meaning the owner tenant creates the MTO object, multi-tenant object, and then invites other tenants. This invitation will then be applied in the member tenants to join the multi-tenant organization. And with the B2B member, again, the B2B guest, no, we use B2B members. This enables it to seamless collaboration experience in other applications. But what applications are supported basically? First of all, we have a supported of Teams. We have Viva Engage, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business. We have Power BI currently in preview, Power Apps Dynamics with restricted functionality. So this is currently supported for a multi-tenant organization. Not supported are all this, or not yet supported, are all these applications listed in here. Then existing B2B collaboration members. So let's say you already worked with this company, you just acquired, you do the merger now, and you already invited some users as B2B guest users so they can access your Teams. These member users can be reused. No need to delete them and re-invite them or sync them to your tenant and then grant them access again. That's no need either. You convert them manually to B2B members, or you can do this by synchronization. So existing B2B collab members will then become multi-tenant members as soon as you did the configuration for multi-tenant organization. You have a better Teams collaboration because of the vice versa, the reciprocal provisioning of the synchronization engine. And there's also, because these B2B guests will be B2B members, this means that you will be able to share files or folders in OneDrive for Business and SharePoint Online with the people in company link type. So let's say you share this deep dive all about multi-tenant PowerPoint slide to people in your company, then a B2B member users will be able to access this even it's technically outside, but you promoted this guest to a member, and therefore it will be able to access, or the user will be able to access this shared file. I hope this makes it, I hope this doesn't confuse it too much. Then more features are features in Viva Engage. The current support is support for announcements and communications in multiple tenants in Viva Engage. So Viva Engage, this is the former Yammer. Integration in Storyline and leadership via hub tenant. This is especially, I'd say, important now because Viva Storyline is currently being more and more included in or directly integrated into Teams. There is a change rolling out at the moment where Storyline will be integrated into the Teams one-to-one chat as an additional tab. Therefore, you don't need to go to Viva Engage dedicated. So if you are using Storyline and have multiple tenants, then this will be quite interesting or even important to you. Then you can share leadership announcements and storylines between tenants, and you also have network and conversation analytics over all tenants joining or participating in the Viva Engage multi-tenant MTO campaigns. You can do campaigns from Viva Engage through all tenants, like Ask Me Anything and events. But there are also some requirements for Viva Engage. You need native networks. I think that should be rolled out anyway by now. Microsoft is converting all legacy networks since years to native mode networks. Then you need a full trust between all tenants, and that's quite of a caveat probably. You need to have an additional license, either Viva Suite license or Viva Communications and Communities license. So this isn't for free in multi-tenant organization. To have these features, you need to have at least these additional licenses available. Then a storyline needs to be enabled in the hub tenant, and leadership corner storylines and communities are available now for cross-tenant engagement, and only these features in a multi-tenant org, but more features will be added soon for multi-tenant organizations. So Microsoft is currently still developing a lot of more features to multi-tenant organization. This also means if you are thinking of, is this enough now? Yeah, it's barely enough, but we need a bit more. Perhaps in a half a year or a year, there will be even more. No, there will be more features available then, because we have a roadmap regarding this. Like they already tell us, more features will be added soon. Then in Viva Engage, this looks like this. If someone posts something, then in the home tenant, there is no tag available, like as you see here, Adil wants, no tag available. But for Megan Bowen in the multi-tenant org, you see, that's a user from the other tenant. The tag is applied from Contoso, and therefore you see that's a participant user in Viva Engage from the other tenant in multi-tenant organization. Same here in Storyline, we see it represented as a tag if it's a user from an external tenant, but external meaning inside the multi-tenant org. Then inside features for regarding Teams and SharePoint Online, as mentioned, B2B members are now not guests anymore. They are members. This means they are internal users. They go directly through your lobby. Let's say you have a lobby policy in the meeting policy configuration, and all external users need to wait in the lobby, and internal users just go through the lobby into the meeting. Then this B2B members, so users in the multi-tenant org from other tenants, will be treated as internal users, and therefore just go like your internal users through the meeting lobbies. They will have Copilot access. That's a feature that was just rolled out. They are like internal users again, so only internal users currently have access to Copilot during Teams meetings, and so this external/internal member users will now have access to Copilot. B2B guests will be matched to B2B members. You don't need to switch tenants anymore for guest chats because there are no more guest chats anymore. And if you share files in OneDrive for Business or SharePoint Online, you can choose them, the other people using the people picker or via org link. Here we see a screenshot before the multi-tenant organization happened. I chatted to Christy Klein. Christy, by default, Christy was already added as B2B guest user to our Teams. That's why we have the Christy Klein with the remark of guest. And then we have the external chat with the external tag to Christy Klein. So we see this is, we don't see any profile picture or something like that. And after the configuration, after the multi-tenant organization configuration was done, and then I converted Christy from B2B guest to B2B member, and then it looked like this. We see now magically the profile picture appeared, and there is no more external chat or external tag anymore, and there is no more remark of a guest user anymore. And actually these will then be merged. No, sorry, they won't be merged, but it will only be possible to use one of these two chats because the external isn't external anymore. The chat history will remain, but if you try to send something in the external chat or in the former external chat, then it will show you a banner that you need, or you will be automatically redirected to the internal chat window. You don't have two chats anymore with the same person like you do have with a normal B2B guest scenario. So what are the requirements to configure this before we go now finally into the configuration part? You need Entra ID P1 as a license, but you need only one Microsoft Entra ID P1 license per employee. It doesn't matter in which tenant you assign the license to the user. You need one per employee per multi-tenant organization, but you need at least one Entra ID P1 license per tenant. So you can have all licenses in one tenant and only one in the other tenant. You need one because the Entra ID will be upgraded to the P1 features, and B2B synchronization, for example, is a P1 feature. Therefore, at least one license is needed to upgrade the tenant functionality to P1 functionality mode. Then you need at least security administrators and privileged role administrator to consent for the permissions. I did it during the demonstration here. I used global administrator because it's okay in a demo tenant, right? So you can have a maximum of 100 tenants per multi-tenant organization. This was a bit lower in preview, but now was raised to up to 100 tenants, meaning one owner and up to 99 member tenants. Tenants which are in a GDAP relationship cannot create or join a multi-tenant org. GDAP is also called granular delegated admin privileges, and this is often used from Microsoft partners. Microsoft partners can have their partner administration tenant and invite their customers using GDAP, so they have admin permissions in the customer's tenant to work on or to help using help desk tickets or whatever to work on directly into the destination tenant using their own tenant accounts. So that's GDAP called. And if you are in such a relationship now, but you would like to create a multi-tenant organization, you first need to leave this GDAP, granular delegated admin privileges scenario or role. And your tenants need to be in the same cloud environments. So you can have multi-tenant in all cloud environments. So it's available in GCC, GCC High, DoD, and multi-tenant and worldwide. But you cannot form a multi-tenant organization between, let's say, a normal commercial tenant and a GCC tenant. That's not possible. But you can do it between different tenants inside a GCC environment. This should work then. So now let's go into demonstration part. First, we will do a configuration of multi-tenant organization. We will configure the owner tenant. We configure a member tenant. Then we will synchronize some users, only some users, to the other tenant. Review then the created configuration, because we don't do the cross-tenant access settings. We let the wizard do this, but we will review the configuration afterwards. And then we will see the experience in Teams chat again. For the demonstration, I used Tenant, but wait, first, do we have already some questions before we go into the demonstration? Let me check. I don't see anything. I don't know if the Q&A app works properly. If you put something into the Q&A app, please let me know in the chat. Okay, let's go back into multi-tenant organization demonstration. Okay, we have the owner tenant, that's changecockpitlab.onmicrosoft.com, and we have these 3 users in scope for the multi-tenant configuration. Then we have the member tenant, that's a Microsoft demo tenant, that's starting with M365X and some random number. And we use these 2 users, Alan de Jong and Christy Klein, and we will synchronize these 2 users to the owner tenant and the 3 from the owner tenant down to the member tenant. So let's go into the configuration part. We start here now in Microsoft 365 Admin Center of the owner tenant, Change Cockpit lab.onmicrosoft.com. We first check, yes, it's the right tenant. When we go to settings, org settings, we will go to organization profile, multi-tenant collaboration, it's part in there, and then get started using create a new multi-tenant org. We have the option of creating a new multi-tenant org or join an existing multi-tenant organization right from here. Create a new one. We will need to give it the name, the organization name. I use CC Lab org, and then I need to add the member tenants. Caveat here, you need to input the tenant ID, the GUID of the tenant. You cannot enter the tenant name like lab.onmicrosoft.com. That doesn't work. You need the GUID, but you can easily get it from Enter ID or from whatismytenantid.com. But then to check it, it will resolve now the tenant GUID to the tenant name, so you're sure you're inviting the right tenant. It's Contoso now. I select it. I only invite 1 tenant for now. Then I have 2 checkboxes. For those of you who already configure cross-tenant access settings, these are familiar to you. It's allow users to sync onto this tenant from the other tenants in this MTO and suppress consent prompts for users from the other tenant. To have the full fidelity or the full feature set, we will select both checkboxes by now. Click on Next. And then create. And now we have the details and these details of the tenant, and we can copy the instructions to clipboard. These are the instructions which you can now send to the member tenant admins, so they can use the information provided in these instructions to join your MTO organization. And we see here now both tenants are in there. That's the content of this invitation email, or this invitation you just copy to the clipboard. And now we see here we have both tenants in there, and one is active and Contoso is still pending because it didn't redeem the invitation by now. So that's the first part, quite easy. We created multi-tenant configuration and added 1 tenant. Now let's go to the member tenant, or it will be a member tenant soon. It's the Contoso tenant. There's another banner on top, and we will go to the same place. Let's check we're in the right tenant. Yes, it's Contoso, and we also go to settings, org settings. First check the invitation we just got from the tenant, from the owner tenant's admin. Then settings, org settings. organization profile, multi-tenant collaboration. Click also on Get Started. Now join a multi-tenant organization in here, and we will need to paste the tenant ID of the owner tenant, and we will also check both checkboxes like we did in the owner tenant for the invitation. It will also resolve to the tenant name, so we are sure that we are joining the right MTO organization. That's it, and we are done. And now we see here the message, your tenant is being added. This can take some time. It will take 1 or 2 cloud minutes. This means 1 or 2 hours in real time. So therefore I waited for 2 or 3 hours before I went back to recheck again. And it will then afterwards be configured correctly. We will see it just in a second when we go to the configuration part. So basically, that was the part of setting up the owner tenant and the member tenant to join the owner tenant. Now, let's go back to set up the user synchronization. You can do it the easy way and select some users from in here, or you can do it the hard way, let's say, and do the configuration by yourself in Entra ID. If I were you, I would select just some users, and if you want to extend it or even want to say, okay, I only want to have members of this security group synchronized to the other tenant, then you can customize the configuration from Entra ID. That's fully supported, so you don't need to do the base configuration manually, but you can then change the configuration later on. So we are in the right tenant, in the Change Cockpit Lab tenant, and we now see in the background, we see here we have the Change Cockpit in your tenant and Contoso that just joined. Membership status is now for both active and not pending anymore, but the outbound synchronization status is not applicable because it's the own tenant, and for the member tenant it's on not configured. So let's continue with the configuration. I will do the simplified thing, as just mentioned, not the customized synchronization. I don't want to do it myself. I let the wizard do the work for me and set it up everything back in Entra ID. Now I select some users from my tenant to synchronize to the member tenant. I select Adil, Alex, and Diego. And this will be synced out to all member tenants. We only have 1 member tenant currently, but let's say you have 10 member tenants, then these 3 users will be synchronized now to all member tenants. Let's go to Contoso tenant, do the same thing, settings, org settings, organization profile. And we also share users from in here. Now we only select 2 users. Takes some time. And I synchronized 2 users now, Christy and Alan, to all other tenants. So in this case, only to the owner tenant. That's it. These users will be synced. And we will check the status now, outbound synchronization status. It will update quickly. And we see it's now enabled for Contoso. It's enabled, everything green, meaning the users are synchronized to the owner tenant. Basically, that's it for the MTO configuration for the part. So everything should work now in Teams. And we just to review the configuration done now, we have the regular B2B guest and external chat after the invitation. As shown before, no MTO, no think. I have two chats, no profile picture. And there is a guest mentioned and the external tag. And in enter ID, this user Christy looked like the Christy C underscore and then the tenant name, and the user type is guest from external Azure AD. So it's a B2B guest user. And now after the configuration was done, in enter ID, Christy now looks like this. It's now a user type member and not a guest anymore, but the identity is still from external Azure AD and it's still a creation type of invitation. So let's say it's a mix of a regular member user, but it's a guest member user, also meaning the password is still being maintained in the guest tenant. And as shown before, we have now the profile picture showing up and we have no more external mentions anymore. The cross-tenant access settings were also configured automatically by the wizard. And these were configured in each organization. Sorry, my mouse pointer went away. My laser pointer. So we're configured in each organization, and they always look the same. It's in external identities, cross-tenant access settings, and it's now for Contoso configured. That's I think that's already known because we did cross-tenant access settings since years for now. The cross-tenant synchronization part. Let's check me the question I just got. Thank you. Okay, it's a longer one because of the time. I will follow up the question right after I'm done with the presentation. I hope you can wait this long. So cross-tenant synchronization, we check the configuration in here. We go to enter ID, cross-tenant synchronization, and now we have a configuration part. And the configuration, when it's done by the MTO wizard, it's always MTO underscore sync underscore and then the GUID. So this was created now in here, and that's now quite an important part regarding the attributes and the member settings. You see, we synchronized 3 users, 100% is complete. We see it's for these 3 users. That's the part or the place where you would add more users, for example, or if you would like to have only members of a certain group being synchronized, then you added the group in here. The group itself won't be synchronized to the other tenants. You cannot synchronize groups between tenants, only users, but the members of these groups will be synchronized to the other tenants. Then we have the provisioning of the users, the settings. We have first the admin credentials. That's everything maintained by MTO Wizard. And we have the user mappings. And that's now quite an important part. We see here all the attribute mappings and all attributes which will be copied over to the other tenants. You can remove some attributes, but not all of them. Let's say you have the postal code, and postal code can be deleted. There are certain attributes which are mandatory, and then the delete button is grayed out. So you can somehow customize, but at the moment you cannot add new attributes in here. Then one very important attribute, as mentioned many times by now, is the user type attribute. By default, the user type attribute will be synchronized as member, as user type member, and not as guest. This setting will now provision the B2B guest users as B2B guest / B2B member user. And by default, the configuration is apply this mapping only during object creation. So existing B2B guests will need to be updated to member users by you manually, or you just apply this mapping here to always, and then enter ID, the cross-tenant synchronization will convert the existing B2B guests to B2B members if you change this to always. So that's quite a hint in here for your already existing users. That's a configuration of the cross-tenant synchronization part. And now some hints or some things to consider. First of all, you can apply tenant labels. So if you go into the MTO configuration setting in M365 admin centers, by default, you have no label, meaning you cannot easily distinguish if this user you are chatting to is from inside the tenant or it's from another tenant within the MTO organization. That's where you could now add a custom label, which you can specify to each tenant, and then your users would see that these users are residing in another tenant within the MTO configuration. The attribute mapping I just mentioned, you can customize, and especially the member guest attribute is very, very important. As soon as you have your guest users your B2B users as members and not as guests anymore, you can then also set up free busy sharing using federation trusts. Long time now they're already available, but because they are now showing up in global address list, then and you can configure organization relationships for free busy sharing, then you can also access free busy details from each other tenant's Exchange Online. That's the only integration regarding Exchange Online which is working currently, and also the global address list. Then to mention, all chats aren't merged when the user will be converted from guest to member, but the user still sees the chat thread as member, but sending a new chat message to this thread is blocked. That's what I mentioned before. There is only one chat available now. Before the MTO configuration, you had the guest and the external chat. Just to keep in mind, MTO users are B2B members. Because they are members, they have member rights in your tenant. This means an MTO user can also create teams if you didn't restrict this to a group. If it's still open, then they also can create teams in the other tenant, and they can also invite guests from other tenants if they have the appropriate permissions within the teams. A profile picture, as shown before in the chat, is visible for MTO users in Teams, but not yet in other clients, because this profile picture that's a team thing. Teams is doing this behind the scenes because Teams sees others. An MTO configuration goes into the other tenant and gets out the profile picture, but this experience only works currently inside Teams, Teams chats, Teams profile card. You won't see the profile image now, or the profile picture now in the Outlook contact card. This doesn't work, at least yet. And Teams and conference room booking across tenants is not yet supported, because conference rooms are an Exchange feature, and Exchange isn't really supported yet, except of the global address list integration and free busy between tenants. As I'm a bit over time, I'm coming back to a question afterwards, but first quickly the outro part of this presentation. This session was also sponsored by Change Cockpit, one of the 3 sponsors of the whole Cloud8 event. But what actually is Change Cockpit? Change Cockpit is a monthly live event where we will announce all changes which are rolling out only in the current and the following month in the Microsoft 365 categorized workloads. We have importance scores in there, and it's currently, we announced there 120 changes per month. So if you are done, and if you are tired of reading the message center for yourself, if you're tired of reading all the tech community blogs, then we will deliver this within 2 hours every month to you, so you can sit back, relax, and enjoy, and then you know all the relevant changes, and only the changes which are important now, because we only announced the ones rolling out this and the following month. If you are interested, free demonstrations available on changecockpit.cloud. The next events regarding this are February 19th. Change Cockpit is available in Swiss, German, and in English from 3 to 5 or 9:30 till 11:30. All times are in Central European time. And there will be another deep dive about SharePoint on Advanced Management. Deep dive is like the event now we just had in here, all about multi-tenant. Sign up on changecockpit.cloud for this free demo. So quickly, this advertising part. I hope you enjoyed this session, and let's go now to the question part, Q&A. Thanks for all the great details. There's a question here. So for instance, if there are two separate business units with each its own IT organization, tenant admins, the tenant admin of the member tenant has more control and an active say on what will be synced on the owner tenant, correct? Or are there some more control options for the owner tenant admins, maybe inbound rules? For the users, only for every tenant admin will define or will control which users are being synchronized to the other tenants. The owner tenant, despite being the owner tenant, has no admin privileges in all the member tenants. That's not what it is about. So the owner tenant doesn't have admin privileges, and the member tenant admin still remain full control of all configuration items and full control of what is going on and what will be synchronized. You could invite the owner tenant admins like for the Defender security control and do MTO Defender multi-tenant, but that's not part of it. No. So I hope I answered this question a bit, and you could do inbound rules. No, you do only outbound rules regarding the users which are or who are being synchronized. So defining all the users. I hope this makes some clear. If you have any more questions, I'm here for. Thanks for clarifying. So owner tenant can't be a HQ tenant when it comes to an hierarchical IT org. No, the owner tenant still needs to have an admin account in the member tenant. It's only about having the experiences like in Teams chat and so on. Okay. If you don't have any more questions, I would say thank you. I hope you learned something in here. Thanks for being here, and I hope you had a great time, and I wish you all nice rest of the day. Thanks. Goodbye.